When the seas began to rise faster than scientists predicted, humanity was forced to rethink where and how it lived. At first, governments built higher dams, stronger walls, and complex drainage tunnels beneath coastal cities. But as decades passed, those defenses became like sandcastles facing a relentless tide. The world needed something radical, something that didn't merely resist nature, but moved with it. And so, the era of floating cities began. The first prototypes were small, experimental platforms built by engineers working day and night on a solution that could protect millions of people. What started as a desperate idea slowly transformed into a global movement. The floating cities, later called aerospheres, were designed like massive circular islands, each with multiple layers. The top layer held homes, schools, gardens, and public squares. The middle layer contained the energy grids, water processors, and recycling systems. The lowest layer, unseen by most residents, housed the stabilizing rings and enormous turbines that converted ocean currents into power. Life on these floating cities was unlike anything the world had ever known. When you stepped outside, the ground felt stable, yet you could sense the subtle sway of the ocean beneath. The sunlight reflected off the surrounding water, creating shimmering glows along the metallic edges of the platforms. At night, the cities lit up like constellations drifting across the waves. Ilara, a 17-year-old whose family moved to the floating city of Lissara, remembered her first day clearly. She stood near the city's edge, staring down at the ocean stretching in every direction. It was both beautiful and intimidating. Her old home, once thriving on the coast, had been abandoned after storms destroyed half the town. Lissara was supposed to be a fresh start, but Ilara didn't know if she was ready to trust a city that floated. Her father, an engineer, believed deeply in the technology. "These cities aren't just inventions," he told her. "They're our future." He saw floating cities as symbols of human creativity, but Ilara saw them as fragile islands suspended above a world humans were still learning to respect. School in Lissara was a new experience too. Her classroom walls were made of transparent panels where digital screens appeared with just a tap. Lessons were often interrupted by announcements about energy adjustments or turbine checks. Students learned not only math and languages, but also ocean science, current patterns, and ecological balance, subjects considered essential for life on a floating world. One afternoon, Ilara wandered into the Ocean Observatory, a dome-shaped structure at the city's center. It was quiet, except for the distant hum of the turbines below. She approached the panoramic window and gazed beneath the city. Schools of fish glided between beams and rotating structures. It fascinated her how marine life adapted to the artificial environment. Some species even thrived more here than in the open sea, protected by the stability and warmth generated by the turbines. Yet not everything was peaceful. Rumors spread among residents that one of the older floating cities, Pelagia, was experiencing structural instability. Videos leaked showing parts of its turbine system shaking violently during a storm. Experts reassured the public that the situation was under control, but anxiety quietly grew. If one floating city failed, what would that mean for the others? For families like Ilara's? That night, as the moon cast silver trails across the water, Ilara couldn't sleep. She wondered what it meant to live in a world where cities could drift, shift, or even break apart. Were floating cities a triumph or a temporary escape from a problem humanity hadn't solved? She didn't know the answer yet, but she would soon find out. The following morning, the city rang with alarms. Ilara rushed out of her room, meeting her father in the hallway. "What's happening?" she asked. "Pelagia," he said, grabbing his emergency toolkit. Its stabilizing ring collapsed. They're evacuating the entire city. Within minutes, Lysara's docks filled with rescue crafts. Families gathered around screens, showing Pelagia tilting dangerously as waves hammered its sides. Towering structures that once stood proudly now leaned like fragile towers of cards. Ilara watched in horror. She realized how delicate their floating world truly was. Her father boarded one of the rescue ships, joining the emergency engineering team. "Stay here with your mother," he told her before leaving. His voice was steady, but she knew he was terrified. Hours passed. Messages flowed in waves, some hopeful, others devastating. Pelagia's turbines had failed completely, leaving the city unable to stabilize. The evacuation continued, but strong currents were pushing Pelagia farther into open waters, making rescue efforts harder. Ilara paced restlessly. She felt useless, trapped in a city that swayed gently while another city fought to survive. Finally, she made a decision. She headed to the Ocean Observatory, where she knew communications engineers were coordinating rescue signals. When she arrived, she found chaos. Screens flashing, technicians shouting into headsets, maps updating by the second. "I can help," she said, surprising even herself. The lead technician looked at her skeptically. "How?" Ilara pointed to the ocean current analysis screen. "You're tracking Pelagia's drift patterns the old way. But last week, Dr. Halen taught us a new method using dynamic current modeling. It adjusts predictions based on turbine interference and temperature layers." The technician hesitated, then stepped aside. "Show me." Working quickly, Ilara entered calculations, adjusting the drift projection. The new model revealed a narrow rescue corridor where currents slowed temporarily. "If you send ships here," she said, pointing at the highlighted zone, "they can intercept Pelagia before it enters the eastern whirlpool." The technicians relayed the new coordinates. Minutes later, rescue teams confirmed visual contact with Pelagia's drifting edge. A pathway had opened, brief but enough. By nightfall, the final groups of evacuees were safely aboard rescue vessels. Pelagia, however, was beyond saving. When the last ship departed, the great floating city slowly disappeared into the distant fog, carried away by the relentless sea. Ilara waited anxiously for her father. When he finally returned, exhausted but smiling, she rushed into his arms. "You helped save them," he whispered. "Your calculations made the difference." For the first time, Ilara felt something shift inside her. Fear had guided her for so long, but now she understood that floating cities weren't simply fragile creations. They were evolving, adapting, and learning just as humans were, and she wanted to be part of that evolution. In the following days, global discussions erupted. Engineers analyzed Pelagia's collapse. Governments reviewed safety standards, and oceanographers proposed new current-responsive stabilizers. Humanity was shaken, but not defeated. Lissara held a memorial for Pelagia. Residents gathered at the city's border, releasing glowing lanterns that drifted across the water like tiny spirits. Ilara watched them float into the horizon and felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next morning, she enrolled in the advanced engineering program. She didn't want to just live in a floating city. She wanted to shape the future of them. She imagined new designs, stronger turbines, smarter stabilizers, and ways for cities to dance with the ocean instead of fighting against it. Years later, Ilara would become one of the architects behind the next generation of floating megacities, cities that no longer feared the sea, but flourished upon it. And whenever she looked back at the lanterns drifting across the dark water, she remembered the moment she stopped fearing the waves and started listening to them, because in a world where cities had become floating islands, survival wasn't just about technology. It was about understanding the ocean's rhythms, respecting its power, and finding harmony between human ambition and nature's timeless rule. In the years following Pelagia's fall, the world entered what scholars later called the Second Age of Floating Innovation. The disaster had awakened humanity to a critical truth. Floating cities were not static creations. They were living systems, deeply connected to the moods and movements of the ocean. If people wanted these cities to last, they had to build them with humility, intelligence, and constant adaptation. Ilara, now a student in Lissara's advanced engineering program, found herself at the center of this transformation. Every morning, she joined her classmates in the hydrodynamics hall, a vast chamber filled with model turbines, modular stabilizers, and swirling tanks that simulated the behavior of dangerous ocean currents. Professors no longer taught only traditional engineering techniques. Now the curriculum included responsive architecture, biomimetic structures, and predictive flow algorithms. The new generation of students would not just maintain floating cities, they would reinvent them. Ilara's curiosity deepened when she discovered the Marine Integration Lab, a place where engineers and biologists collaborated to design structures that could coexist with sea life. She spent hours observing how coral fragments attached themselves to synthetic supports, how fish navigated around turbine columns, and how microscopic organisms adapted to the warm currents generated by energy systems. The idea fascinated her. What if the next generation of floating cities weren't only resistant to the ocean, but were part of its ecosystem? One evening, Ilara stayed late in the lab, sketching ideas for a new stabilizer that could adjust its angle based not only on waves, but also on shifts in underwater ecosystems. As she examined sensor data, her mentor, Dr. Halen, approached quietly. "You're thinking in the right direction," he said. "The ocean doesn't just push water, it moves life. If cities can learn from that movement, they'll last 1,000 years. Ilara smiled. I just want to build something that won't collapse like Pelagia did. Dr. Halen nodded gravely. Pelagia wasn't a failure. It was a message, and you're one of the people who answered it. Her design proposal quickly caught the attention of the Research Council. They invited her to join a team preparing for an ambitious new project, Aurelia, a floating megacity unlike anything built before. Aurelia would be wider, stronger, and more adaptive, powered by a stabilizer network that responded to currents in real time. Its outer ring would be lined with living reefs and sensor towers designed to harmonize with the sea. But as excitement grew, so did doubts among some residents of older floating cities. Rumors spread that Aurelia's construction would consume too many resources, leaving smaller cities vulnerable. Others feared that pushing technology too far would anger the already unpredictable ocean. As debates heated across global networks, an unexpected crisis struck Lasara. A series of unusual currents surged beneath the city, causing sudden tilts and tremors. Alarms blared across residential blocks, and citizens rushed to emergency stations. Engineers scrambled to stabilize the turbines, but the ocean's behavior was different this time. More aggressive, more chaotic. Ilara hurried to the observation deck, where the waters churned with unsettling force. She recognized that these currents didn't match any recorded patterns. Something had shifted beneath the surface. Something that threatened not only Lasara, but all floating cities. Dr. Halen appeared beside her, pale and tense. "The deep currents are rising," he said. "This shouldn't be happening, not now." Ilara felt a familiar fear tightening in her chest, but she pushed it aside. "We need to map the new currents. If we understand them, we can redirect the stabilizers." The crisis marked the beginning of an event that would change everything. It was the moment humanity realized that the ocean was entering a new phase, and that their floating world needed to evolve faster than ever before. For the next 48 hours, Lasara operated in emergency mode. Turbines strained, stabilizers rotated at maximum capacity, and engineers slept in shifts as they battled the unpredictable force beneath them. The floating city, which had always seemed calm, graceful, and steady, now trembled like a leaf riding a storm. Ilara joined the emergency analysis team in the Ocean Observatory. Screens displayed real-time simulations of the deep currents rising from far below. The patterns were unlike anything the team had encountered. "It's almost rhythmic," Ilara murmured as she traced the data. "Like the ocean is breathing differently." Dr. Halen studied the same data. "The tectonic layers are shifting. It's not just currents. We're seeing geothermal activity pushing the deep water upward." The implications were enormous. If geothermal surges became frequent, floating cities would need to adapt at a level never previously imagined. Lasara, Pelagia, and even the newly planned Aurelia faced risks no engineer had prepared for. As the analysis continued, the city council called for a global summit. Delegates from every floating city gathered via holographic channels, forming a network of flickering silhouettes across Lasara's central dome. Ilara watched quietly from the observation deck as leaders argued, debated, and scrambled for solutions. Some demanded immediate evacuation of vulnerable cities. Others insisted on accelerating Aurelia's construction, claiming it would serve as a fortress against chaos. A few proposed abandoning floating cities altogether and returning to inland settlements. Then Dr. Halen stepped forward. "We are not losing a battle against nature," he said. "We are being asked to listen more closely." He proposed a radical plan, the Resonance Project, a system of deep anchors, flexible stabilizing rings, and adaptive turbines that could tune themselves to the ocean's new rhythm. Instead of resisting the surges, floating cities would synchronize with them, converting unpredictable movements into usable energy. The idea drew both awe and skepticism. Some leaders dismissed it as impossible, but Alara stood up and spoke with determination. "Floating cities changed the world once," she said. "They can do it again. We survived Pelagia because we learned. We will survive this if we evolve." Her words spread across the summit like a quiet spark. Slowly, support began to form. Engineers volunteered, governments pledged resources, and after hours of tense debate, the Council approved the first phase of the Resonance Project. Lasara became the testing ground. Teams installed Ilara's adaptive stabilizers around the city's perimeter. Turbine engineers recalibrated energy systems to respond to the rising currents. Marine biologists modified reef structures to absorb shock waves. For the first time, humans weren't trying to dominate the ocean. They were trying to move with it. When the next geothermal surge struck, Lasara braced itself. The waters rose, swirling with tremendous force. But this time, the city shifted gracefully. Stabilizers tilted at precise angles. Turbines rotated in harmony with the current. The trembling lessened, the city held. When the waves finally calmed, the entire population erupted into applause. This success sparked a global transformation. Floating cities across the world adopted the Resonance Project, combining Ilara's stabilizers with Dr. Halen's rhythmic algorithms. Aurelia's construction resumed, now redesigned as the first fully resonant megacity. A home that didn't simply float on the ocean, but flowed with it like a living organism. Years later, Ilara stood on Aurelia's observation deck, watching the city drift like a luminous island among thousands of migrating lanterns sent from other floating cities in celebration. She felt the ocean's pulse beneath her feet, steady and familiar. Humanity had not conquered the sea. It had finally learned to listen. And because of that, the floating islands of the world would continue to thrive for generations to come.